Monica Harris stepped into the marble-floored lobby of Hamilton Trust's flagship branch just after 9 a.m., dressed in a navy hoodie, black slacks, and a pair of simple flats. Her natural curls were neatly styled, and she carried a plain leather purse slung over her shoulder, nothing flashy, nothing to suggest the weight of the title she carried. To the staff behind the counter, she looked like any middle-class woman. Maybe there to cash a paycheck or inquire about a savings account. None of them knew that the woman quietly waiting in the queue had signed off on half their bonuses. Just 3 months ago, Monica chose to blend in for a reason, and today would prove exactly why that choice mattered. She waited patiently as several customers were called ahead of her, including a sharply dressed man in a grey suit who was immediately ushered to a private desk, and a young woman in yoga pants who received cheerful service in under 2 minutes. Monica had been sitting for over 35 minutes before she was finally called to the counter. The teller, a young woman named Megan, offered a tight smile that faded as soon as she glanced at Monica's withdrawal slip. $115,000. She repeated the tone, not accusatory, but certainly skeptical. Megan's eyes moved quickly from the slip to Monica's ID and then to her face, as if double-checking to ensure the person before her hadn't made some kind of mistake, or worse, wasn't trying to pull a fast one. Monica remained composed. "That's correct," she said evenly. "It's within the daily limit for my account." But her calm didn't stop Megan from hesitating. Instead of processing the transaction, Megan leaned slightly toward the teller next to her. Ryan and whispered something under her breath. Monica couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She had seen this script play out before. Ryan, older and more assertive, approached her window and stood behind Megan like a silent enforcer. "Ma'am, this is a significant amount of money," he said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "We'll need to verify your account history and confirm that the funds are really available." His tone was flat professional on the surface, but the implication was clear. In their eyes, Monica didn't look like someone who had access to 6 figures. The lobby grew quieter as more employees glanced over. An older woman at the back clutched her handbag a little tighter. One man nearby smirked and shook his head. Monica stood tall, her posture betraying no emotion, even as judgment radiated around her. Ryan stared at her ID as if it were forged. Megan began clicking through account records, her eyes darting between the screen and Monica with growing unease. Then Luke, another employee with slicked-back hair and a patronizing grin, joined the scene uninvited. "Is this one of those cash windfalls?" he said with a half-laugh. "Lottery winnings, maybe, or inheritance." The disrespect was no longer subtle. It was now a performance unfolding publicly with no regard for discretion. Monica's fingers brushed against the leather of her purse, feeling for the phone she hadn't yet pulled out. She didn't want to escalate things too soon. After all, this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the culture she'd sworn to fix when she accepted the role of CEO. The institution bore her leadership, but clearly not all of its branches had embraced the values she stood for. What the staff didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that the woman they were treating like a potential fraudster was the very person they reported to, whether they realized it or not. And that ignorance, that blindness to what leadership looks like, was about to cost them dearly. As Ryan and Luke continued to scrutinize her account, and Megan tapped nervously at her keyboard, Monica gave them one last chance to do the right thing. "I've provided my ID, my bank card, and my account number," she said, keeping her voice steady. "If there are concerns, I'd like to speak with someone who has the authority to resolve them." That was when Caroline Moore, the branch manager, made her entrance, striding over with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned, never been held accountable. She didn't offer a greeting or introduce herself. She didn't even ask Monica's name. Instead, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she said, "I'm not sure this amount is appropriate for someone like you." And just like that, the mask slipped, revealing not a security concern, but pure, calculated prejudice. Monica Harris's journey to the top of Hamilton Trust didn't begin in a boardroom, but behind a teller window in a small suburban branch just outside Cleveland. She was 21, fresh out of community college, wearing a second-hand blazer and a name tag that read Teller Trainee. Her first day on the job, she was handed a worn binder full of bank policies and told to keep her smile polished and her drawer balanced. She took both instructions seriously. While others memorized just enough to pass the probation period, Monica mastered every process. She volunteered to help with branch audits, trained slower co-workers, and often stayed late to rework workflows that could shave minutes off customer wait times. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just didn't know how to do things halfway. Her managers noticed promotions followed slowly. At first, then with accelerating speed. Monica became a loan officer, then assistant branch manager, and eventually took over a struggling branch that others had written off as a lost cause. Within a year, she had not only turned it around, but doubled its loan approvals and brought customer satisfaction scores to the top 5% across the region. Her reputation for being calm under pressure and relentless in problem-solving started circulating beyond local circles. She was offered a transfer to the Metro District, and while others might have hesitated, Monica packed her bags and dove into the bigger, messier world of corporate finance. Her goal wasn't to climb. Her goal was to fix what others ignored. Monica didn't come from legacy wealth or boardroom connections. She grew up in a two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat raised by a mother who worked night shifts at a hospital and a father who spent 20 years maintaining city buses. The concept of generational wealth was foreign to her. What she understood was the value of integrity, hard work, and making your presence undeniable. Her upbringing shaped the kind of leader she would become, humble in presence, but unshakably precise in principle. While working full-time and managing a team of 25, Monica pursued her MBA at Stanford. She studied between branch meetings, wrote case studies in airport lounges, and submitted final exams from hotel rooms during district conferences. She graduated with distinction, one of only 3 in her cohort to do so. By the time she returned to Hamilton Trust's main office, Monica was no longer just a high-performing regional director. She was the person the company called when things fell apart. When a newly acquired branch in Chicago faced regulatory trouble, she went in. When a branch in Atlanta lost half its clientele due to poor service, Monica flew down, shook hands with every employee, and rewrote the customer service playbook on site. Her results weren't just impressive, they were transformative. Over the span of 15 years, Monica rebuilt 5 different regions and trained over 200 managers across the country. Her style wasn't loud or boastful. She listened, first, acted decisively, and always led from the front. Yet when the CEO of Hamilton Trust announced his retirement and Monica's name surfaced as the natural successor, the room didn't cheer. It paused. There were whispers in hallways and hesitation in boardrooms. Some questioned whether major stakeholders would connect with her leadership style. Others raised vague concerns about visibility and brand representation, coded language that barely masked a deeper bias. It wasn't her track record, they doubted it was her skin tone. Behind closed doors, decision-makers debated not her qualifications, but how comfortable their top-tier clients would be seeing a black woman as the face of a $60 billion institution. Monica heard the rumors. She saw the hesitation in board members' eyes, the way some congratulated her with smiles that didn't quite reach their mouths. Still, she didn't flinch. When the board finally voted after the longest deliberation in the company's history, Monica Harris was named CEO of Hamilton Trust, becoming the first black woman to ever lead a top 10 financial institution in the country. At her first press conference standing beneath the Hamilton Trust banner, she said this company has always been about building trust, building value, and building futures that only works if everyone is included. And under my leadership, everyone will be. Her words were graceful but direct, and behind them stood 2 decades of grit intelligence and earned respect. Yet even then she knew the journey wasn't over. The higher she rose, the more invisible barriers she encountered, not just for herself, but for countless customers and employees whose voices were still being silenced in the very system she now led. So when Monica decided to go undercover to walk quietly into her own flagship branch and test whether her mission of equity had truly reached the front lines, It wasn't on a whim. It was the act of a woman who had spent her life proving herself over and over again and who understood that real leadership doesn't just sit in offices or give speeches. Real leadership walks into uncomfortable places, listens to uncomfortable truths and acts. What she encountered that morning at the counter wasn't just personal insult. It was proof that the job was far from finished. Weeks before Monica Harris ever stepped foot into the downtown flagship branch, her instincts were already sounding alarms. As CEO of Hamilton Trust, she had access to mountains of performance reports, quarterly earnings, branch efficiency, customer retention rates, satisfaction surveys. On the surface, everything looked pristine. The downtown location had some of the highest transaction volumes in the region, glowing marks on internal audits, and a pristine record for meeting growth targets. But Monica had spent her entire career learning how to read between the lines. She knew that what wasn't written in reports often said more than what was. Buried beneath the glowing metrics were exit surveys and offhand remarks, customers, particularly those from minority backgrounds, consistently citing feelings of being dismissed, judged, or unwelcome. It wasn't just one complaint, it was a pattern. Customers of color were closing their accounts at a higher rate. Loan applications from minority-owned businesses had longer processing times. Survey responses from Black and Latino clients consistently ranked the branch lower in categories like professionalism and courtesy. The data didn't scream outright discrimination, but it whispered it. Monica had seen this before. She knew how bias could seep into an institution not through policy, but through culture. Subtle behaviors, passive neglect, coded language that widened invisible gaps between service and respect. When she confronted senior regional managers, they pointed to the numbers and shrugged. The complaints are anecdotal. One executive told her, "You can't manage perception," but Monica could and she would. She decided she needed to see it with her own eyes, not through a quarterly presentation or a filtered report, but directly unfiltered, raw and real. The idea wasn't born from anger, but clarity. Change doesn't come from data alone. Change comes when the leader steps down from the podium and walks through the front door like everyone else. She chose the downtown branch deliberately. Not only was it the most profitable location, but it was also held up as a model for others. If bias was festering there, it meant the rot was deeper than anyone admitted. So Monica planned the visit in silence, telling no one except her executive assistant and head of security. Even they didn't know the full reason why. She prepared carefully. No designer handbag, no corporate suit. Instead, she chose a simple navy hoodie, neutral-toned pants, sneakers that had seen some wear. Her makeup was minimal. Her natural curls pulled back simply, and her purse was the same one she'd carried during her early days in branch operations. She didn't want to look wealthy or powerful. She wanted to look average, ordinary, someone who could walk into any bank branch in America and ask for her money without raising suspicion or eyebrows. Her identity wasn't hidden, it was ignored, and that was exactly the point. The morning of the visit, Monica arrived at 9:15 a.m., just after the branch opened. She entered through the main doors, her steps measured but relaxed, her presence unremarkable by design. She took a seat in the lobby like any other customer, observing quietly as interactions unfolded around her. What she witnessed within the first 15 minutes confirmed every concern she'd had. White customers, well-dressed or not, were greeted with warmth, ushered through processes, quickly offered help. Proactively. Black, Latino, and Asian customers, meanwhile, received curt instructions, longer wait times, and suspicious glances. It was subtle but unmistakable. A difference not in what was said, but in how it was said. The kind of discrimination that never appears in training manuals, but thrives in unchecked habits. That morning, Monica watched a young Latina mother wait nearly 25 minutes to open a savings account, while a white college student in workout clothes was served within 5. She observed an elderly black man asked for 2 forms of ID to deposit a check, while a white businessman carrying a briefcase was waved through with a smile and a handshake. It wasn't just inconsistent, it was corrosive. She noted every expression, every delay, every difference in tone. Her decision to go undercover had been rooted in a gut feeling. What she was now witnessing transformed that instinct into hard, irrefutable truth. The disparities weren't just imagined, they were institutional. But the most telling moment came when Monica herself stepped up to the counter after waiting more than half an hour while others were served ahead of her. She handed over her ID and a withdrawal slip requesting $115,000, an amount fully within the limits of her account but large enough to test the system. The moment her name and amount were visible, the mood at the counter changed. The teller's smile faded and whispers rippled behind the glass. A simple transaction became a spectacle, and with every passing second it became clear to Monica the real problem at Hamilton Trust wasn't buried in spreadsheets, it was standing behind the counter. From her seat in the waiting area of Hamilton Trust's flagship branch, Monica Harris watched with the attentiveness of someone who had trained hundreds of bank employees in customer experience and who now questioned whether any of it had stuck. The branch itself was designed to impress polished granite floors, minimalist decor, and the scent of fresh coffee faintly wafting from the complimentary beverage station. But beneath the sleek aesthetic, Monica saw something else, an undercurrent of inequality, masked by polite smiles and professional uniforms. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, systemic routine, and that made it all the more dangerous. The first customer to walk in after Monica was a middle-aged white man in a tailored navy suit. Before he even reached the counter, a young staff member named Rachel intercepted him with a smile so bright it could have lit up the whole lobby. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "What can we assist you with today?" Without hesitation, he was ushered past the line and into a glass-walled office, offered coffee, and addressed by name. Minutes later, a white woman in casual attire approached the teller window. "Hey, Chelsea," the teller chirped. "How was the beach trip?" Their conversation was light-friendly, peppered with laughter. Her transaction took under 2 minutes. No ID checks, no questions. Then came an elderly Asian couple, modestly dressed and clutching a bank brochure. They were met not with smiles, but with a curt gesture from the receptionist, pointing them toward the ticket dispenser. No verbal greeting, no eye contact. When their number was finally called 15 minutes later, they struggled with the English instructions, but no one offered to help. Shortly after, a Latino man in janitor's overalls approached the same window where Chelsea had just been cheerfully served. The shift in demeanor was immediate. The teller straightened eyes, narrowed, and asked for 2 forms of ID. "What's the purpose of this check?" she asked sharply. He looked confused but compliant, explaining it was his weekly paycheck. The teller called over a supervisor, and the transaction stretched out for nearly 10 minutes. The man never once raised his voice, but his posture visibly sagged under the weight of the unnecessary scrutiny. Monica's eyes followed every movement, cataloguing each inconsistency. A young black woman in scrubs, clearly on her way to or from a shift, was asked to wait just a moment, while 2 white customers who arrived after her were served first. When she politely inquired about the delay, the teller said her system was temporarily locked, then turned to chat with a co-worker. There was no apology, no offer of assistance, no sense of urgency. Monica noticed that the same teller became noticeably more animated when the next customer, a man in golf attire, approached her window. "Good morning. How's the new Tesla?" she asked, already pulling up his account without needing to be prompted. It wasn't just what was done, it was how it was done. The tone of voice, the speed of service, the body language. White customers were offered warmth, familiarity, and trust. Customers of color were met with distant suspicion and cold professionalism. If Monica hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she might have been persuaded by the branch's glowing metrics, but numbers don't capture the length of a pause, the coolness of a stare, or the tension that builds when a customer realizes they've been silently categorized as high risk before they've even spoken. The disparity wasn't policy, it was perception, and perception, when left unchallenged, can become practice. After 40 minutes of silent observation, Monica rose from her seat and joined the queue. She had watched 6 white customers breeze through the process, all greeted with ease and handled efficiently. Meanwhile, 5 customers of color had endured everything from long waits to interrogating questions, each leaving with visible frustration or in some cases not even being served. She took a steadying breath and stepped forward when her number was finally called. The moment her ID and withdrawal slip were placed on the counter, the subtle hostility she had observed in whispers and glances became directed squarely at her. And just like that, she was no longer the observer. She was the test, and the branch was about to fail. Monica Harris approached the counter with the same composure she had carried into boardrooms and budget hearings for years. Her ID and withdrawal slip were neatly placed on the glossy surface of the teller window. She looked the young woman behind the glass. In the eyes offered a polite nod and said clearly, "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please." The teller, whose name tag read Megan, offered a neutral smile that vanished the moment she read the amount written on the slip, 115,000. Her eyebrows twitched ever so slightly. Her gaze dropped to the ID, then flicked back to Monica's face, her lips tightening as though confirming an unspoken suspicion. The energy shifted instantly. Where other customers had been met with casual ease, Monica was met with caution. "This is a large amount," Megan said carefully, her voice carrying just enough to catch the attention of her colleague at the next station. Monica remained calm. "Yes, it's within the daily withdrawal limit for my account." She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't need to, but Megan wasn't listening with professional ears anymore. She was listening with a narrative already formed in her mind, one where large cash withdrawals from modestly dressed black women were out of place, unusual, and suspect. "One moment," Megan said without meeting Monica's eyes again. She stood, leaned slightly to her left, and whispered something to the man working the next window over, a man who would soon make himself far more visible. That man was Ryan, the assistant branch manager. Tall, sharply dressed, and clearly accustomed to being the loudest voice in any space, Ryan made no attempt at discretion as he approached. "Is there a problem here?" he asked loudly, his voice neutral on the surface but already tilted with assumption. He didn't direct the question to Megan. He looked directly at Monica, placing himself as an authority figure before she could even reply. The question wasn't an inquiry. It was an accusation wrapped in politeness. Monica responded with professional precision. "No problem. I'm simply requesting a withdrawal. My ID and bank card are on the counter." She gestured to the documents already in front of Megan, who now sat still. Hands paused above the keyboard, caught between protocol and discomfort. Ryan picked up Monica's ID and inspected it as if looking for something that didn't belong. His scrutiny was exaggerated, theatrical, flipping the card over, squinting at the details, pausing just long enough to signal to anyone nearby that this was out of the ordinary. The few remaining customers in the lobby began to shift in their seats. An elderly woman clutched her purse closer. A young man, pretending to scroll through his phone, watched intently from the corner of his eye. "We've been noticing some unusual activity on accounts like this," Ryan said, emphasizing like this, with a knowing glance toward Megan. Monica raised an eyebrow. "What kind of activity would that be?" she asked calmly. Ryan didn't answer. Instead, he nodded at Megan. "Can you pull up the account history? Let's see what we're dealing with." At that moment, another staff member drifted over Luke, who had spent much of the morning cracking jokes by the printer. He leaned casually against the side counter, arms folded, a smug smirk already forming. "Maybe she hit the jackpot or something," he muttered, not bothering to hide his voice. "Or maybe it's one of those settlements." The insinuation hung heavy in the air. Megan typed her fingers, faltering slightly over the keys. Monica felt the heat of a dozen stares on her back. She could feel the shift from a customer to a spectacle. Every moment, every delay, every whisper was now part of something bigger, and they had no idea who she was. Monica stood motionless posture, upright, her voice never wavering. "I've provided all the documentation required to complete a transaction that is fully within policy. If there's a specific concern, I'd like to speak with someone authorized to explain it." Ryan stepped closer. "I am the authority here," he said. The words weren't shouted, but they didn't need to be. They were meant to assert dominance, to re-establish a hierarchy that placed her beneath suspicion and him above question. And in that moment, with her own ID under someone else's thumb, Monica understood the depth of the problem at Hamilton Trust. The problem wasn't just who got served quickly, it was who was seen as deserving to be served at all. The scrutiny Monica Harris faced at the counter didn't lessen, it intensified. What had started as a quiet attempt to make a routine withdrawal had become a slow public unspooling of prejudice, cloaked in the language of policy and procedure. Megan sat stiffly behind her screen, hesitating over the keyboard, eyes flicking nervously between the account and Monica's face. Ryan lingered, close arms crossed, making no effort to create a sense of privacy. "Can you tell us what the money is for?" he asked suddenly. His tone was soft, almost conversational, but the question wasn't. Monica blinked once, holding his gaze. "Excuse me," she replied. Ryan repeated it, this time louder. "This is a substantial amount of cash. We need to understand the purpose of the withdrawal." It was a question that hadn't been asked of any of the white customers Monica had watched walk up and take out tens of thousands of dollars without hesitation. Not one of them had been asked for justification, but here she was under the microscope. "It's for personal use," Monica said flatly, "which, as you know, doesn't require disclosure under your bank's current withdrawal policy." Her voice was calm, clipped professional, but beneath her tone a fire burned. Luke, still loitering at the side like a spectator at a show, chuckled quietly. "You can't be too careful these days," he said. "You'd be surprised how many of these big withdrawals turn out to be scams. Or worse." The implication was crystal clear. People like you couldn't be trusted. Megan remained silent, her hands frozen above the keyboard. Ryan leaned down beside her, speaking in a voice just loud enough for Monica to hear. "We've seen a lot of fraud lately," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sometimes people show up with fake IDs, forged checks, or try to launder stolen money. You understand, we have to be cautious." Monica inhaled slowly. "I understand security," she said. "I also understand the importance of consistency in how it's applied." "Are you accusing me of something?" "Mr. Ryan," he said, "assistant branch manager." His name, his title presented like a badge of authority, not of accountability. "No one's accusing you. We're just taking precautions." Luke smirked. "If everything checks out, no problem," he added, though his tone dripped with sarcasm. "But if it doesn't, well, that's a different conversation." Before Monica could respond, a new figure entered the scene, a woman in her 40s confidently striding across the floor in heels that clicked authoritatively against the marble tile. Her blazer was immaculate, her hair sleek, and her expression perfectly composed. Caroline Moore, the branch manager. Her eyes scanned the scene like a general surveying a battlefield. She didn't introduce herself, nor did she ask Monica for her name. Instead, she addressed Ryan and Megan as if Monica weren't even present. "What's the issue?" Ryan handed over Monica's withdrawal slip and ID without a word. Caroline glanced at them briefly before turning to Monica with a tight smile. "I understand you're requesting quite a large sum of money today." The air thickened as Caroline's presence filled the space. Unlike Ryan, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority hummed just beneath the surface. "We typically reserve large cash transactions for our private clients," she said smoothly. "Could you clarify your relationship with the bank?" Monica stood motionless, her hands still resting on the counter. "I've had an account here for years," she replied. "My relationship with Hamilton Trust is well established. My identification has been verified, and the transaction is within policy." Caroline nodded slightly, but her eyes betrayed her thoughts. "Of course," she said. "It's just that we have certain standards. I'm sure you can understand that not every customer fits the profile for this kind of request." Monica didn't blink, but inside she felt the old sensation rising, one she had felt countless times as a black woman in corporate America, the subtle suggestion that she was not enough, not credible enough, not welcome enough. Caroline's words weren't explosive. They were precise, practiced, and devastating. She didn't need to say, "You don't belong here." Her tone did that for her. Behind the counter, Megan shifted uncomfortably. Luke leaned back, arms folded, smugly. Ryan stared ahead, expression unreadable. Around them, customers listened in silence, pretending not to. But everyone could feel what was happening. A woman who had done everything right, who had provided every document, spoken with patience, followed every step, was being reduced to a stereotype in real time. And yet she stood unmoved. Because Monica Harris wasn't just here to make a withdrawal. She was here to reveal the truth, and it was happening exactly as she'd suspected. Monica Harris took a small step back from the counter, careful to remain within full view of the staff and the security cameras. She reached into her modest leather purse, the same one her former team had gifted her after her COO promotion, and retrieved her phone. Her movements were calm, unhurried, the opposite of the tension that had taken over the lobby. Without looking at the people now frozen behind the teller windows, she unlocked her screen and dialed a number from memory. The moment the call connected, her posture shifted just slightly, subtle but unmistakable. "Yes, this is Monica Harris," she said, her voice even professional. "Can you connect me with Samantha Pierce? Tell her it's urgent. I'm calling from the downtown branch." The effect was immediate, though no one said a word. The name Samantha Pierce hung in the air like a warning bell. Ryan's eyebrows twitched. Luke, who had been leaning back in his usual pose of performative apathy, straightened just a bit. Megan, who had grown increasingly quiet over the last 5 minutes, glanced up from her monitor, her fingers now nervously drumming the desk. But it was Caroline Moore whose demeanor cracked first. The practiced composure on her face faltered not entirely, but enough. She tilted her head as though trying to place the name Samantha Pierce. The name was familiar, uncomfortably. So head of operations, one of the most powerful women in the company, and someone very few people outside the executive circle could call directly. Still, Caroline recovered quickly, or at least tried to. "Ma'am," she began, stepping closer, her voice softening slightly. "We're simply following standard protocol. There's no need to involve upper management for a routine request." Monica held up a finger gently, signaling that she was still on the line. She turned her back slightly, not as a gesture of disrespect, but as a signal that her attention had shifted to something far more serious than Caroline Moore's posturing. "Yes," Monica said into the phone. "I'm at the downtown flagship. They've refused to process a withdrawal that's within my account limit. I've provided valid identification, but I'm being delayed and questioned in ways that are not in line with our policy." She paused. "Yes, I'll hold." Caroline took a half step forward, clearly unnerved. "Miss Harris, I assure you we're doing everything we can to assist." Monica turned slightly, offering a cool, composed glance. "If that were true, this would have been handled 30 minutes ago," she said evenly. No raised voice, no visible frustration, just fact. And that composure was what unnerved them the most. Monica wasn't acting like a desperate customer. She wasn't flustered, defensive, or pleading. She was speaking like someone who had nothing to prove and everything already in motion. Caroline's eyes narrowed as her confidence began to waver. This woman knew policy. She knew people. She had just name-dropped one of the most powerful executives at Hamilton Trust, like it was a routine call. Who was she really? Meanwhile, Monica used her phone's camera to begin documenting the interaction quietly, efficiently. She didn't zoom in on faces or raise her voice. She recorded the counter, her own documents, the timestamps, and the expressions of the employees around her. Luke had gone pale and silent. His bravado completely evaporated. Ryan stepped back, mumbling something about checking the safe. Megan, now visibly rattled, stopped typing altogether. But it wasn't fear of Monica they were responding to, it was fear of what she might represent. Caroline turned to look at the ceiling camera, as if realizing too late that every second of this encounter had already been preserved by the security system. Their words, their body language, their assumptions, all of it caught on tape. The quiet in the lobby grew heavier, not with chaos, but anticipation. Customers sat still in their chairs, sensing something important was unfolding. The tension that had once surrounded Monica like an accusation was now surrounding the staff like a warning. She continued speaking into the phone with the same controlled tone. "Yes, I'll stay here," she said. "I'll wait for Samantha's return call, and I've begun documenting the encounter in case compliance needs a copy. Thank you." She hung up and placed her phone beside her ID on the counter, folding her hands gently in front of her. She didn't look angry. She didn't look scared. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had spent her entire career preparing for a moment like this, and no one in that building, not Caroline, not Ryan, not Luke, was ready for what would come next. At precisely 10:17 a.m., Samantha Pierce was reviewing quarterly performance metrics in her office on the 20th floor of Hamilton Trust's corporate headquarters. The morning had been until that moment uneventful, filled with back-to-back check-ins, compliance updates, and strategic planning meetings. Her tablet was propped upright. Her desk, spotless, and a half-empty coffee cup sat cooling beside a thick folder of talent development reports. Then her office line rang. She picked up without checking the caller ID, her habit not from carelessness, but confidence. "Samantha Pierce," she said crisply. On the other end of the line, she heard a calm, familiar voice that stopped her cold. "Sam, it's Monica. I'm at the downtown branch. I need you to listen very carefully." Samantha didn't need context. The moment Monica Harris spoke those words, everything else faded. Her fingers froze above the screen. Her breath caught not out of panic, but from the sheer gravity of what she sensed was unfolding. "Say no more," she said. "I'll handle it." Without hesitation, she turned to her assistant. "Pull every complaint we've received about the downtown flagship branch in the last 12 months. I want internal notes, transcripts, exit surveys, and informal flags. Everything, even what didn't make it into the formal reports." The assistant, startled by her tone, sprang into action. Samantha was already on her feet, her heels clicking against the polished floor with sharp purpose as she crossed to the executive wing. She pressed a button on her phone. "Security team, live access to the downtown branch. I want camera feeds from every angle routed to my dashboard." Now, within minutes, Samantha's office transformed into a command center. Her dual monitors lit up with synchronized footage from the flagship branch, the front counter, the customer service area, the employee break room. Her tablet showed the time-stamped logs of staff activity. As she scanned the live feed, her eyes narrowed. There was Monica standing calm and composed, surrounded by 3 visibly anxious staff members, none of whom seemed to understand who they were speaking to. Samantha's jaw tightened. "Get legal," she said sharply. "Compliance too, and alert the board. I want them in the operations room within 15 minutes. They need to see this for themselves." On the 21st floor, the executive conference room quickly filled with high-ranking officials, the chairman of the board, the chief risk officer, the general counsel, and 2 board members who had voted against Monica's promotion 6 months earlier. Samantha didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Take a seat," she ordered, already casting the footage from her screen to the 90-inch display mounted on the wall. "This is happening right now. You're about to see how our CEO is being treated in our top-performing branch." One board member squinted, confused. "That's Monica," he asked, pointing at the screen where Monica stood, stoic at the teller window. "Yes," Samantha replied, "and the footage goes back 40 minutes. We're not just seeing what's happening, we're seeing how this culture has been allowed to operate unchecked." The room fell silent as the reality set in. The expressions of the employees on screen, dismissive, condescending, openly mocking, played out in high definition. They watched Ryan hover, Luke smirk, and Caroline Moore enter the frame with the false charm of someone who believed she held the final say. The live audio kicked in. "We typically reserve these kinds of transactions for our private clients," Caroline said. The room tensed, then came Monica's voice, calm and unwavering. "I've had an account here for years. My relationship with Hamilton Trust is well established." The tension in the executive room reached a peak. "Pause the footage," the chairman barked. "Are we seriously letting this happen in our flagship?" No, Samantha said, her voice like steel. Not anymore. She resumed playback, but now she was texting simultaneously, issuing commands to the HR division, contacting the director of communications to prepare for potential fallout, and requesting customer demographic breakdowns from every branch. Then she turned back to the group. We've relied on metrics and clean reports to tell us our branches are healthy, she said, but culture doesn't show up in spreadsheets. What we're witnessing is the result of ignoring the things we can't quantify. The board watched as Monica reached for her phone and began recording. Caroline flinched, Luke backed away, Ryan disappeared from the frame. The walls of silence of false safety were crumbling, and for the first time everyone in the top floor of Hamilton Trust saw it for what it was, not a one-time misstep, but a system revealing itself. Inside the high-ceilinged executive conference room of Hamilton Trust's headquarters, a heavy silence had settled over the board. Not the calm kind that follows a productive meeting, but the charged quiet of realization, the kind that only occurs when the truth can no longer be denied. On the screen before them, the live footage from the downtown branch continued to play. Monica Harris, the very CEO they had unanimously appointed, just months earlier stood at the center of the bank's marble-floored lobby, being treated like an inconvenience, an anomaly, or worse, a threat. Board members leaned forward, eyes narrowing, jaws set in disbelief. The voice of Caroline Moore played out over the audio, her tone measured but unmistakably patronizing. We typically reserve large withdrawals for our private clients, she'd said, as if Monica didn't belong. The implications sank in fast. That's not just bad service, muttered Jonathan Reeves, chairman of the board. That's active discrimination. He looked down at the table, his knuckles whitening around a pen. Across from him, Catherine Lynn, the youngest board member, tapped her tablet furiously, already comparing the treatment of other customers in the day's footage. Look at the timestamps, she said. Every white customer, over 10,000, got immediate service, smiles, greetings. But every person of color, every single one, was stalled, interrogated, or outright dismissed. Her voice trembled with restrained anger. The board had prided itself on building a reputation for inclusive banking. What they were watching shattered that illusion. In real time, Samantha Pierce didn't wait for consensus. She was already halfway out the door, her leather briefcase in one hand and her tablet in the other. I'm going down there, she said. Not asking for permission. I'm bringing legal and compliance with me. And I suggest every one of you prepare for a public reckoning. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her tone was final, the kind that prompted action without delay. As she stepped into the private executive elevator, she messaged Monica, I'm on my way. Sit tight. It ends today. Legal counsel, Jessica Wynne, and Chief Compliance Officer, Richard Kent, joined her seconds later. Both pale, both grim, none of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Back in the operations room, the tech team was pulling up heat maps of internal complaints. A young analyst named Evan had quietly run a side-by-side analysis of exit surveys from the downtown branch versus other locations. It's not just today, he said, pushing the data onto the main screen. This branch has the highest rate of minority customer attrition in the entire network. Triple the average on-screen graphs painted a clear pattern. Hispanic customers cited lack of respect as a top reason for leaving. Black customers used words like dismissed, judged, and not trusted far more frequently than white counterparts. Asian business clients had disproportionately low loan approval rates despite equal or stronger financial profiles. The numbers didn't lie, they had just been buried under layers of corporate optimism. Jonathan Reeves turned to the head of security. Were we aware of this? He demanded. The man shook his head. Not formally. The complaints were too scattered. They never triggered escalation thresholds. Samantha had warned about this months ago, how thresholds and algorithms often overlooked patterns that only human observation could catch. Today, Monica had proven that point, not through a task force or a memo, but by placing herself on the front lines. She told us this would happen, Catherine said softly. She told us culture doesn't change because we wish it to. It changes because we confront what we don't want to see. In the lobby below, unaware that her every move was now being monitored by the most powerful people in the organization, Monica remained still. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't stormed out. She simply stood with the quiet strength of someone who had built a career on refusing to be overlooked. But upstairs, the storm had already broken. Samantha's heels echoed down the marble hallway as she exited the elevator into the flagship branch. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was electric, charged with purpose and backed by the full authority of the institution. She passed customers, tellers, and mid-level staff who instinctively stepped aside. Caroline Moore, still speaking in vague condescension to Monica, didn't even notice her approach, but she was about to. The culture at Hamilton Trust had just run out of places to hide. The sound of the flagship branch's double doors swinging open echoed through the marble lobby like a gavel striking wood. All at once, conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clicking of a keyboard ceased. Even the hum of the cash-counting machine seemed to fall silent. Samantha Pierce entered like a thunderclap, wrapped in navy wool, precise, focused, radiating control. Behind her trailed two members of the legal team and a senior compliance officer, each wearing the expression of someone who had just read a classified document that would change everything. Without pausing at the reception desk, Samantha strode across the floor with purpose. In a single gesture, she raised her hand toward the main service counter and said in a firm, unwavering voice, "Operations are frozen. Right now, no one moved." Tellers stood in stunned silence. A customer halfway through filling out a deposit slip stopped writing mid-stroke. Security guards instinctively straightened, unsure whether to intervene or salute. Samantha's presence wasn't just authoritative, it was final. Her eyes locked onto Caroline Moore, who stood only a few feet from Monica, still obliviously running her rehearsed playbook of false concern. Caroline opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to ask who this was or why she was interrupting, but the moment never came. "Don't," Samantha said, sharply, slicing through the air like a blade. "You've said enough." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried the weight of hierarchy and judgment. The air in the branch thickened. Then Samantha turned to face the staff, and customers gathered their attention, fixed on the unfolding scene with a mixture of confusion and awe. She took a breath, looked directly at the cluster of employees behind the teller windows, and said the words that would reverberate through every hallway of Hamilton Trust for years to come. "This is Monica Harris," she announced, gesturing toward the woman who had remained composed through every slight and suspicion. "She is the Chief Executive Officer of Hamilton Trust and your boss." The words landed like a lightning strike. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's mouth fell open as if he'd been physically struck. Luke's smirk vanished, his face blanching as he took a step back. Megan's eyes welled with tears as she mouthed something under her breath. Oh my God, Caroline, however, didn't react right away. For a long second, she simply stared at Monica, her eyes scanning the woman's face as though trying to rewrite the past 45 minutes. But it wouldn't erase what had already been done. The truth was immovable now, and for the first time, Caroline's mask of control began to slip. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, hard eyes darting to the nearby cameras, to the faces of the customers, to the phone still resting on the counter beside Monica's ID. The realization crashed in waves, slow, crushing, and irreversible. Customers who had tried not to stare before now couldn't look away. An older black man who had been waiting patiently in the corner let out a quiet but audible, "Well, I'll be damned." A young mother pulled her son closer and whispered something in his ear that might later become a lesson. Even the security guard, Thomas, barely a year into the job, took a small but decisive step back from Caroline, distancing himself from what he now understood to be a career-defining disaster. Samantha turned to him, nodded once, and said, "Please lock the doors. No one in or out until we've concluded internal review." Thomas hesitated only a second, then moved with steady resolve toward the main entrance. And still Monica stood there, tall, silent, unshaken. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't uttered a single command. Yet the balance of power in the room had shifted entirely in her favor. No longer seen through the lens of prejudice, assumption, or bias, she now stood illuminated by truth and title. But more than that, she stood as a mirror, reflecting every choice, every failure, and every judgment made by the people around her. Samantha looked toward Monica, her expression a blend of fury and respect, then turned back to the room and said, "What happens next will be by the book, but make no mistake, everything has already changed." And just like that, the structure of Hamilton Trust began to realign itself around a new, undeniable center of power, the woman they had underestimated and who had quietly revealed them all. The atmosphere inside the flagship branch had transformed entirely. The once busy lobby had become a courtroom without walls, and Monica Harris stood not as the accused, but as the final authority, silent, poised, and impossible to ignore. Samantha Pierce remained at her side, her arms crossed tightly across her chest as the legal and compliance teams assembled behind them. The staff who had mocked, delayed, or disrespected Monica minutes earlier now stood in a strained semicircle, faces pale, eyes wide. Even the customers who had once looked on with indifference now watched with rapt attention, sensing that something historic, something just was about to happen. Monica didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough. She turned to Caroline Moore first. The branch manager's expression wavered between defiance and disbelief. Caroline Monica began her tone clear. "And even your behavior today and your leadership at this location have made one thing undeniable. You are no longer fit to represent this institution." The words fell like bricks. Effective immediately, your employment at Hamilton Trust is terminated. There was no build-up, no debate. Caroline blinked, her mouth opening slightly as though to argue, but Monica raised a hand. "There is no appeal. You've demonstrated a systemic disregard for our values and for the human dignity of the people we serve. You are dismissed." She didn't pause for dramatic effect. She turned next to Ryan. "As assistant manager, your role was to uphold standards, not reinforce biases." She said, "You escalated a simple request into a discriminatory incident. You did not act alone, but you acted with full authority and confidence that what you were doing was acceptable. That, in itself, proves how broken this culture has become. You are terminated immediately." Ryan's shoulders sagged as the words hit him. Luke, standing to the side, looked away, already knowing what was coming. "Luke," Monica continued, "you took it a step further. Your mockery, your insinuations, your body language all communicated a deep disrespect. Not just for me, but for every customer who's ever walked into this branch and looked like me. You're done here. Security will escort all three of you to collect your belongings and exit the premises." Security didn't rush. They didn't need to. Thomas, the young guard, walked forward respectfully, not with force but with solemn purpose. As he led Caroline, Ryan, and Luke toward the back, the branch fell utterly still. There was no applause, no cheering, only the weight of accountability settling over the building like a long-awaited storm. But not everyone in that semicircle would be removed. Monica's eyes turned to Megan, the teller who had first received her at the counter. Megan had been complicit but not cruel, and more importantly, she had been visibly uncomfortable throughout the entire ordeal. Her guilt had not been performative, it had been human. Monica stepped forward slowly. "Megan," she said gently, "I watched your hesitation. I saw your fear, your uncertainty, your silence." Megan's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slightly, unable to speak. That silence allowed harm. Monica continued, "But it also tells me that you knew something wasn't right, and that is where change begins, not with perfection, but with recognition." Megan's lips trembled. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do." Monica nodded. "I believe you, and I believe you can learn. You're being placed on probation. You'll undergo retraining and mentoring directly under my supervision. You'll stay, but only if you're ready to be part of the solution." Megan nodded again, more firmly this time, and for the first time that morning a sliver of hope entered her expression. Monica turned back to the room, addressing not just the employees, but the customers still watching. "Let me be very clear," she said. "This isn't about three people. This is about a culture, a deeply rooted belief system that allowed this kind of behavior to flourish in plain sight. This is not just a firing, it's a reckoning." Her voice remained steady, filled with resolve. "If you are here to serve, you will serve everyone with dignity. If you are here to lead, you will lead with fairness. And if you can't do either, you will not remain at Hamilton Trust." Her words didn't echo. They embedded into the minds of everyone present. The old system built on unchecked assumptions and passive complicity had just been dismantled, and in its place, Monica had begun laying the foundation for something new, something better, something that wouldn't just be enforced, but lived. By the end of the day, the air inside Hamilton Trust's downtown flagship branch had shifted from tension to transformation. While Caroline, Ryan, and Luke were escorted out in silence, Monica Harris remained exactly where she had stood during the confrontation at the center of the room, both figuratively and literally. But now she turned to face the staff not as the aggrieved customer they had once misjudged, but as their leader. And with calm, deliberate clarity, she did something no one had expected Megan. She said, her voice steady but kind, step forward. The young teller, still pale from the morning's events, moved hesitantly toward her shoulders. Drawn lips pressed together to hold back another wave of tears. Monica didn't reprimand her. She acknowledged her. "You were the first person I spoke to today. You had a choice. And while you didn't speak up the way you could have, you also didn't participate in what followed. More importantly, I saw the moment you realized it was wrong." Megan looked at her eyes, brimming with disbelief. "So I'm giving you another choice. Effective immediately, you are being promoted to interim branch manager." A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. "Not because you're perfect," Monica continued, "but because you showed self-awareness, because you didn't double down on the behavior, because you had the courage to feel shame." Megan covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head in stunned silence. "You'll receive leadership training, a direct mentorship track, and full oversight support. You've seen what a broken system looks like. Now I want you to help rebuild it." Later that week, under the crystal chandeliers of Hamilton Trust's downtown media auditorium, Monica stood before a sea of press executive staff and invited guests to announce the most comprehensive reform in the company's history. Her backdrop was bold and simple. Hamilton Trust, building forward together. She stepped to the podium in a tailored grey suit, not to defend the bank, but to redefine it. "What happened at our downtown branch was not an isolated incident," she began. "It was a reflection of structural bias that we have a moral and legal obligation to dismantle, and today we begin that process with transparency, investment, and action." Behind her, flanked by board members and Samantha Pierce, was Megan, standing tall in her new role, a symbol of what growth and accountability could look like. Monica then unveiled the Equitable Banking Initiative, a $50 million multi-year investment aimed at embedding fairness into every layer of the institution. "This isn't a PR campaign," she clarified. "It's infrastructure, it's policy, it's people." The initiative included mandatory anti-bias and equity training for all employees, equity audits conducted independently across all branches, and a revised compensation structure where leadership bonuses would be directly tied to inclusivity metrics, not just profitability. New customer service protocols were being implemented, company-wide, emphasizing identity-conscious engagement and standardized treatment across demographics. "Discrimination doesn't always wear a name tag," Monica said, "but our systems will now be built to see it, stop it, and replace it with dignity." The reform also introduced a client equity advisory council composed of community leaders, small business owners, and long-time customers, many of whom had experienced discrimination firsthand. They would meet quarterly with executive leadership review, anonymized customer data, and propose solutions to eliminate disparities. Monica also committed to publishing an annual equity report made available to the public, detailing progress breakdowns and shortcomings. "If we ask our clients to trust us with their money," she said, then they deserve to see how we're earning that trust every single day. The press, initially braced for crisis management, found themselves witnessing a masterclass in ethical leadership. As the event closed, Monica stepped away from the microphone and walked to the front row. There she sat quietly among former customers who had once felt invisible, who were now collaborators in shaping the future of a national bank. She listened as a black entrepreneur spoke of being denied a loan for reasons never fully explained. As a Latina mother, shared how her financial questions were once brushed aside. As a young Asian business owner, recounted needing to resubmit documentation 3 times while his white peer was approved in a single visit. Monica didn't speak over them. She nodded, took notes, listened like a student, because this too was leadership. Not just policy from the top, but humility from within. By the time the cameras were turned off, Hamilton Trust was no longer the same institution it had been a week earlier. And though trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, Monica had made one thing clear. Change wouldn't come from silence or statements. It would come from structure, from systems, from seeing and from choosing every day to act in alignment with the values that had too long been treated as slogans. The reform wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one, written not just by those who had power, but by those who had once been denied it. And this time, everyone had a seat at the table. 6 months after the day the downtown branch was brought to a standstill, Monica Harris walked into another Hamilton Trust location, this time in a quiet suburb on the outskirts of Dallas. She wore no badge, carried no assistant, and dressed in the same low-profile style that had once caused her identity to be overlooked. But today her purpose wasn't to expose, it was to observe quietly and honestly. She approached the counter just as any other customer would, account inquiry in hand, a few routine questions in mind. What she noticed immediately was not grand gestures or rehearsed scripts. It was posture, tone, respect. The teller greeted her with eye contact and genuine welcome, not because she was the CEO, but because they had been trained to see every person who walked through those doors as deserving of dignity. These surprise visits had become part of Monica's leadership rhythm, not surveillance but reinforcement. Her philosophy wasn't built on punishment, it was anchored in presence. Culture, she often told her team, is shaped most when no one's watching, but solidified when someone who cares shows up. Her presence, even unannounced, served as a quiet reminder that inclusion wasn't an initiative. It was a behavior, a mindset, a daily choice. And across dozens of branches, from Detroit to Denver to Baton Rouge, she began to see signs of that choice becoming habit. Staff asked better questions, managers encouraged transparency. Customers who had once hesitated to speak were now filling out feedback forms, knowing their words would actually matter. Internally, the entire framework of Hamilton Trust's success metrics had been re-engineered. Branch performance was no longer judged solely by revenue or account growth. Fairness, equity, and customer satisfaction across demographics were now weighted equally in every quarterly review. Store leaders were required to complete immersive anti-bias leadership labs. Hiring panels were diversified. Promotions required equity audits. Bonuses were tied not only to bottom lines, but to how equitably those lines were achieved. It's not enough to do well, Monica told the executive team in one review session. We have to do well the right way. That shift in expectations had created a wave of positive attrition. Those who weren't aligned left on their own, while those who stayed stepped up with intention. Meanwhile, the story of what had happened at the downtown branch, and more importantly, what had happened afterward, began to spread beyond Hamilton Trust universities, cited it in leadership courses. Diversity conferences named Monica as one of the top changemakers in financial equity. Her keynote speeches drew crowds not just for her title, but for the calm, uncompromising clarity with which she spoke about accountability and courage. It's not about catching people doing the wrong thing, she once told a packed room of CEOs. It's about building places where the right thing becomes the norm. Her story was not one of outrage or vengeance, it was one of reconstruction of someone who refused to let her experience end in silence. Within the industry, Hamilton Trust became a national benchmark, not because it had never failed, but because it had owned its failure and turned it into fuel. Competing institutions requested guidance. Regulators held it up as an example of proactive reform. New hires at Hamilton Trust no longer asked what happened at the flagship branch. They asked how it changed everything. Monica remained visible, but never boastful. She mentored young women of color in finance, helped launch internal talent pipelines, and maintained a direct email line for any employee to report concerns anonymously, which she read herself every week. Her leadership was not just strategic, it was deeply personal, because she knew what it felt like to be dismissed, and now she made sure no one else had to carry that weight in silence. In the end, Monica's greatest legacy wasn't just that she had turned a humiliating moment into historic reform. It was that she had refused to let power shield her from truth or from empathy. She had chosen to walk into the fire not out of anger, but out of conviction, and she'd come out not scorched, but ignited. Hamilton Trust had become more than a bank. It had become a blueprint for what corporate responsibility should look like, measured not only in profits, but in principles. As Monica stood once again in a quiet lobby in another small town, she smiled when the teller called her mom and asked how they could help. This time, she didn't need to record anything. The proof was already in the air. If this story moved you, if it challenged how you think about leadership fairness or the quiet power of doing the right thing when no one is watching, then join us. At Deep Inside HQ, we uncover the stories that don't just reveal injustice but inspire transformation. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Because change doesn't begin in boardrooms. It begins in conversations, in courage, and in communities like ours. Let's keep going deeper together.